Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 230 of Manage the Wild. I'm your host, Nick Madsen. Today, we're going to be talking about moose calving season. I know it's not the right time. That happened already, but I came across a couple articles that I found super interesting. One, moose start the birthing process during the middle of the day. Researchers believe because predators are less active during the day, they're more crepuscular and nocturnal. And that's kind of what started this whole thing. So let's jump into it. Timing and location. When are they giving birth? And that's roughly May through June. The mean of that is the last week of May into that first week of June. That's about all across all moose habitat. That's about when moose are giving birth. That's just the way it works out. They each have their own calving sites, and depending on the habitat and the area that they are in and geographically located, they could be near water with high amounts of vegetation. They could be away from water with less vegetation, more trees, less shrubs. They could be higher in elevation or they could seek lower elevation. And it just kind of depends on geographically where they're at, as well as what was the process that their mother went through as well. That could be some of that internal influence that they have going on. But what research does show is that they will tend to come back to the same place every year as long as there's not a lot of pressure, whether it's pressure from predators, wolves, bears, cougars, or pressure from outside forces such as loss of habitat destruction, habitat fragmentation. Are there roads being put in? Are there buildings? They will generally come back to the same area time and time again as it allows them. But if forced to, they will moved and pick new sites. They generally will pick the site a few weeks before they give birth as they are in the area, and then they will leave that site and then they will come back to it to give birth. The other thing that's really interesting is when you remove a lot of these predators, whether it's wolves or bears, black bears, brown bears, grizzlies, they tend to synchronize less. Unlike maybe, and it may be because the population isn't high, but unlike mule deer and elk, which tend to drop all within like a 5-day period, moose kind of spread out. Now, there is less of a population, but they are generally dropping at the same time. Other ungulates are dropping, but moose themselves tend to be less synchronized. And one of my thoughts is probably because they don't run around in herds. I attended a meeting once in which the biologist was trying to come up with a moose plan to start hunting moose in an area. The population was such that they were able to, and one of the ranchers said that he didn't want to create a moose plan because he didn't want herds of moose coming in and destroying his habitat for his cattle. And unlike this guy's opinion, moose don't run in herds. They just don't. Maybe they're like me, a little bit grumpy. So they have their location, they go in, they give birth, and they are secluded for a period of time. And this article that I was reading really started off. They give birth during the day when they tended to give birth during the day when predators were less active. Now, wolves are more crepuscular and nocturnal. They said bears, especially black bears, were more variable. They didn't really have a set schedule. But again, most of them seem to be giving birth during the day, which I thought was interesting. The body could trigger that and they could just kind of force that whole process through. Now, it takes them a couple hours to get their feet about them, get their wits, start developing that coordination, but they are vulnerable, completely vulnerable for roughly the next 4 weeks as they develop that coordination, the strength, and the speed to keep up with their mother and to evade predators. They are vulnerable. They are vulnerable to not just predators, but to holes. They've found moose calves laying in badger holes. the badger didn't attack him because when they pulled the calf out to look at it, it was still intact. It had just fallen upside down. They've fallen in ditches upside down. They've gotten trapped in logs before, log jams or stick. They've got tangled up and couldn't get up. They've also come across calves that have drowned in rivers because they had collars on them and the calf was swept away. They've come across a whole number of different ways that calves die, and it's roughly that first 4 to 6 weeks is really difficult for them. They are getting all their nutrition from the cow, their mother, for the first 4 or so weeks from the milk, but then as time goes on, they will start to slowly shift. Now, the interesting thing that I've observed and I've talked to other people about is when you are watching moose, especially a cow and a calf situation, watch how the cow will start to feed on a plant and the calf will be nearby. And then when the cow wanders off, the calf will then come up to that same plant, smelling the saliva from that cow and starts to feed on that same area that cow was feeding on. And this is important because now the calf is learning what the mother's eating, but it's also understanding that noxious or poisonous plant avoidance. And this is one of the ways that they understand what plants they are supposed to eat is by following the mothers and learning what to do. They have a lot to learn in a very short period of time, depending on geographically where they're located. They could only have about 12 or so weeks, 12 to 14 weeks before the first little bit of snow starts coming in. And so it's important for them to put on a lot of fat and understand what plants that they can eat and start putting on as much fat as possible. Dealing with seasonal changes, it happens quick, especially in the first year of their life. They are coming across so much. They are learning, they're growing, they're meeting predators, they're changing habitat, and then you add the movement, geographical movement of these animals. If they're high in elevation, they're going to start moving down. Do they migrate? And how far are they moving? And these are all the challenges that they are going to face in that first year. There are some conservation concerns. Moose populations, depending on where you're at, are facing some real challenges. Here in Utah, especially where I live, parasite loads, tick loads are really a cause for concern. Now, we don't want to necessarily talk about climate change all the time, but as it becomes more of a factor, hotter, warmer temperatures are going to increase the number of parasites because it's not as cold in the wintertime. They really need those cold temperatures and those deep snows to help kill off the ticks and all the lice. The ticks are really a problem. A story that I often think back of, I got called to go pick up a calf that had died in somebody's cabin. They weren't sure why it died. I arrived with a trailer, started to drag it in, and there was blood strung out all across the driveway. And the homeowner come out and was very upset that I had gutted the calf on their driveway. What actually happened is the ticks were about the size of my thumb, large marbles. They were so fat they would just lay on their back and their legs couldn't touch and they would just roll away like marbles. But the ones that were still attached, as I would drag the moose, would pop and explode and they were just full of blood. So basically, these calves were becoming anemic because there was so many parasites feeding on their blood that they weren't able to get the correct nutrition that they needed. So the area that I live in, the warmer it is, Arizona, New Mexico, they have moose as well. Those warm areas really create a challenge for them. They also have a few other things. Pink eye is another issue for them. And then they have some worms that live in their blood system, Eleophora, that also restrict blood flow and cause some challenges for them there. So there are a bunch of challenges that these calves are facing. But this whole thing started because I read that when predators sleep, moose give birth. And I thought that was fascinating. All right, you guys, have a great day. Stay wild.